Hello, you are listening to the Childcare Director's Chair podcast. Your host, Erica Sacosio, invites you to join her community of passionate and inspiring leaders in the ECE field, where she discusses, reflects, and shares the best ways to invest in our children, families, teachers, and community. Because after all, we know they are the heartbeat of any successful program.
An engaging classroom for young children is like a well-tuned instrument. It transforms chaos into harmony and inspires curiosity. It makes teaching a joy rather than a challenge by creating a space where kids and teachers can thrive. In today's episode of the Childcare Director's Chair podcast, we're going to talk about the world of designing a fun and engaging classroom space for children. Join us as we sit down with the talented Carla Ward, an expert in early childhood education. Some of you may know Carla from her own podcast, the Everything ECE podcast. She is from Canada. Her and I have been talking back and forth via email for quite some time, and I am beyond thrilled to have her on our show. She is going to bring us a wealth of knowledge. So welcome to the show, Carla.
Thank you so much for having me. I am so excited that we were finally able to get together and talk about one of my favorite topics, designing spaces.
You know what? I think that people are going to really love this episode because whether you're a seasoned childcare director, or you're just looking to vitalize your existing classrooms, or you're a newcomer, because we were just talking about this before the show. It's like it's the beginning of the school year. So you might have been in the same classroom for a while and you may be looking for like some new ideas, or maybe you have inherited somebody else's classroom and you're like, this isn't really quite how we would put it together. Or maybe you're a director and you're like, I just really want to switch things up. Let me, move things around so everything feels fresh, because that's really what you want at the beginning of the school year. So this is a perfect episode for this time of year. So before we hop into it, can you tell folks a little bit about yourself and maybe your experience, how long you've been in the field, and then also what made you even start your podcast?
Awesome. Great. I'm so excited to share a little bit about myself. So my name is Carla Ward. I'm the owner and founder of Early Learning Foundations and the host of the Everything EC podcast. I'm going to answer your last question first about the podcast because I absolutely love podcasting. And the more I do it, the more I'm loving being a guest. It's funny because I'm usually on the interviewer side. So I started my podcast in January 2020 for two reasons. One, because I'm really chatty and I needed an outlet, but also because my mission is to make early childhood education one of the most respected careers out there. So in order to do that, I wanted to get our voices out there. So I have my podcast, and then I've been guesting on other EC podcasts, but then I also have a podcast course, and that is teaching other ECs how to get their voices out there, because the more of us that talk about what we do in a positive way, which I know can be so hard sometimes, the more we're going to gain that respect. So that was a huge push for me starting the podcast. And then, I do everything ECE. I've been an educator for 20 years or almost 20 years. I've been everything from a toddler, preschool, kindergarten teacher, all in childcare. I've been a supervisor. I now am a consultant, so I go in and support other educators. And I have a membership called the ECE Latte Lounge, where I support early childhood educators in our membership. So I live and breathe early childhood education, I guess is the best way to put that.
Yeah, so we have so much in common. My kids say I'm obsessed. Also, podcasting is my therapy. And like you, I believe that we should all have a voice, which is why I invite every kind of person on this show, whether it's a family childcare provider, a coach like yourself, a director, just pretty much this is our place. This is our platform to really talk about what it is that we do. Because I am with you. It is a very, respected, or it should be a very respected profession. The other thing that really, really was important to me is I cannot keep seeing these centers close down. It is literally breaking my heart. And I'm like, if I can just help one center stay open, then I have achieved my goal. If it's more than one, great. But literally, I cannot keep seeing centers close. I think, almost 100,000 centers closed in the U.S. last year. I can't keep watching it. I can't.
So something I did, and I still don't know if I regret what I did yet, is on Google, you can set Google alerts. So I have early childhood education set as an alert. So anytime early childhood education or an early childhood educator is mentioned in any Google News, anywhere, I get an alert. Let me tell you, I just set off my Google on my phone. That's all I get is notifications about this center shutting down, this center shutting down. And it's something has to change, and it needs to change very quickly.
Yeah. So, but we're going to be super positive today, guys. We don't want to bring you down. We're going to be positive today. So we know that you have to compete and be really creative. And so we're hoping that this episode will give you some enthusiasm to spark things up in your program. Really think about, like, how can I offer the best for my students, the best for my families, whether you're a family childcare, whether you're a center, whether you're a state fund pre-K, whether you're in a school, it doesn't matter. We want you to be excited about what you're doing so we can go out into the community and let people know the good work that we're doing, because we know that early childhood education is just that. It is education, right? So let's talk about it, Carla. Let's get into a little bit about your philosophy on designing classroom spaces. Can we talk with that a little bit, and how we should really be focused, having the child in mind?
Absolutely. So the environment was an absolute game changer for me and made me fall back in love with teaching. We all get to that stage of our career where we think, what have I done? This is hell. Am I in the right career? Like, if you haven't felt that way,
you're lying.
You're new. You're lying, or you're new. I don't even know, right? Like, literally. So changing your environment for the children can really change things for you. So I'm going to start off with a book that changed my life. Is probably the best way to preface the importance of the environment. I read a book called The Third Teacher. Now, funny enough, it wasn't a Reggio book. So it didn't have to do with the Reggio philosophy, which I later came to discover. But it was called The Third Teacher, and it was written by architects. And it went into so much detail about the environment. And what was really interesting was the number one reason that children miss school is because of asthma in the US and Canada. So it's got me looking at my environment in a new way, how my environment actually affects the behaviors of my students, the attitudes of my students, the feelings of my students. So then as I started to observe how my students interacted with the environment, I started to observe how I interacted with my environment. And my environment, I had taken over from another teacher, was chaos. Now, whether you're the child or the educator, you spend more time in your program than you probably do at home when you really think about it, Monday to Friday. So putting energy into your environment will be a game changer for your teaching. So number one, I believe in decluttering. Take out the clutter. That is probably my philosophy, I guess, in that sense. But my philosophy is a Reggio-inspired approach. So looking at the environment as the third teacher and looking at how you can set up the environment in a play-based way so that children can move freely throughout your room. And I'm going to say a word that you're about to hear 100 times on this episode, where they are received consistently with the word yes. So I am Reggio-inspired for yes spaces. So if we're designing a space or an environment to be for children, then it actually needs to be for children. So that was my long way of answering that first question.
Yeah. I love it. I think too, what I loved about, and I know you said it wasn't necessarily the book Reggio inspired, but I think I really love that when I learned a little bit about Reggio in my class studies, that the children were part of the way that we took care of the classroom, the way that, we brought beauty into the classroom. It was their artwork designed and framed and hung at their level, and, fresh flowers in the room and dusting and all of those things. I think, really does help. Again, like you said, that yes part is yes, please water the plants. Yes, let's give water to the fish. Let's feed the fish. Let's put up this new artwork. It gives children that sense of it's their space too, not that they're visiting the teacher's space.
Absolutely. And here in Ontario, we use what's called How Does Learning Happen? So we do it on 4 foundations. So we build on the foundations of belonging, engagement, well-being, and expression. And I would say belonging is one of the most important things you can put energy into when working on that working on that classroom environment or program environment, whether you are a home childcare, you're in a basement of a church, or you're a standalone building. This is something we can all put focus on. Whether you're a nanny, whether it's one-on-one, that's also a great example. So looking at the walls, to your point, are things at a child's level, but also what is at the child's level? Is it carbon copy posters or is it artwork created by the child? I was just doing a consulting job for a new private school that's opening up, and they wanted to create this big mural of the world, and they wanted to do all this stuff. And it was this white wall. And for them, they saw it as something that needed to be filled with adult stuff. I saw it as an opportunity to fill it with the children's creativeness, right? I love bringing in wood and keeping my room fairly natural because the children always brighten up the room. They always bring the color, and they see that space as something to fill with their love, their contribution. And when you don't put the carbon copy posters up and put their artwork up, immediately you're sending the message, hey, I believe you're competent and capable. You belong here, and I respect what you've done.
Yeah. That's great. So what are some key considerations when we're designing the classroom layout for early learners? What are some things that we need to consider besides, you mentioned clutter? What other things should we consider?
So I'm going to list 3 things. Number 1, look at the colors in your room. So as I mentioned, I really like wood. That is not always possible. I have worked with, principals and admin and directors or owners where, I'm stuck with this giant red table that's not even a child size appropriate. Sometimes we just have to make do. Well, colors like red, orange, they really bring up the energy in a room. Yeah, which is not a bad thing. However, when you're working with preschoolers, they don't need much help bringing up the energy in the room. So what I did with my big, ugly red table was I actually covered it in brown paper. And I created it as my art table. So it was a space where they could get messy while standing because it was not appropriate size. So it brought down the tone. Also, bringing in colors like blues, grays, like those are your calming colors, green, those are your calming colors. So also, you don't want a room that's so calm, nobody's doing anything. Like we don't want children napping all day. So my favorite colors are purple and green, actually, to have in a classroom because they're right in the middle. So the greens I bring in through plants. I am a huge promoter for plants. 1, they look amazing, but they're air purifiers. You have 24 preschoolers in one room. That's
Germs
a
are
lot
flowing.
of smell. It's a lot of germs. That's a lot of smells. So spider plants, snake plants, they are non-toxic. I do like to preface that saying, however, if you have children that put things in their mouths, please don't let them eat the plants because we don't know if it's toxic to them. So always put them high up, but bringing in different colors, looking at the color palette of your room can change your environment. The other thing is looking at the lighting. So often we don't have enough space. Even if the ministry tells us that our room is licensed for 24 children, 16 children, however, it still feels like there's too many children in that room for a certain space. So what I like to look at is what areas aren't being played with. And generally it's the corners of the rooms because they're darker. So they're not attracting the children towards it. So what I like to do is say, for example, my book nook, I want to add fairy lights. It brings in some lighting into the corner. It attracts children into that corner, but it's also calming. I also cannot stand, what do you call it? Not UV.
Fluorescent.
I'm sitting underneath them. Thank you. Fluorescent.
Yeah.
Actually, in that book, The Third Teacher, it talks about how bad that lighting really is for you.
Yeah.
It gets terrible. If you have it in your budget, put covers over them, or better yet, turn them off and get lamps. I know I've gotten in trouble with the ministry, depending on which centers I'm at. They don't really like lamps, but I inherited a classroom that had no windows. It had this ugly, giant 9-foot bear on the wall. I kid you not. And we had 30 high schoolers and 20 preschoolers in this room. To say it was chaos was unbelievable. So the first thing we did was turned off the lights and brought in every teacher, bless them, in the school, brought in a lamp from their house. Within 24 hours, we went from chaos to the most beautiful program. It is amazing the difference that lighting can make. And if you have natural windows, even better. And then the other thing I look at is bringing in mirrors. Because again, putting mirrors in those corners will brighten up your areas. Yeah. Yes.
Great. So let's talk a little bit about sensory integration play, because I know lots of students that I work with, they really love that sand, that water, that Play-Doh, anything that they can really manipulate. So can we talk a little bit about how we want to integrate that into the classrooms?
Well, it should just be there every day. But let's go a little deeper on that.
Yeah.
So I highly recommend having a sensory bin. And this is a great example of where you pull the children's interest in. Because sensory is so important to developing their brain. This is what they're here for. They're here to develop. And some children are so sensory sensitive. I'm not using the right word. But the only way for them to work through it is by being exposed. We're not going to go and shove their hands in the Play-Doh if they don't like the feel of Play-Doh, but we're also not going to not put the Play-Doh out, because then they'll never get exposed to it. So having a sensory bin that you change over, I used to change mine over weekly based on the children's interests. I bought picture frames, and I popped out the glass, and around the cardboard, I wrapped different material. And I hammered them to the wall, and I had a whole sensory wall. And I did this even in kindergarten, which we usually think more toddler, preschool. My kindergartners loved it. They would just rub the wall. I had it in my book nook because it also serves as a great way for self-regulation and calming down. So they just sit there and rub the wall. And maybe they weren't dysregulated, maybe they were, but it's just a great way for them to calm their nervous system as well. So making sure that your materials are 3D. The best way for sensory integration, chuck the worksheets. Just get rid of them. Don't even have them. They're 2-dimensional. You don't need them. Paper is paper. So add more 3-dimensional artwork. That is a great way to add in sensory, because you can put fuzzy pom-poms. You can put leaves. We're heading into fall here in Rhode Island and in Toronto. So get stuff from outside. Pine cones, there's sensory exposure. Sticks, that's a different type of sensory. There's so many 3-dimensional objects that will give that sensory integration better than a piece of paper.
Yeah, it's so funny that you mentioned fall, because I am a fall fanatic, as most of us are, where you have seasons. And I went to the farm the other day, and I was like, "Hey, where are the mums?" And he started laughing. He said, "Honey, it's still August." I said, "Well, I'm ready for back to school mode, and I'm ready for mums." He said, "You have to come back in another couple of weeks." But yeah, I mean, we absolutely love that change of season. There's so much excitement that goes on during that time of year. So I love that.
Oh, yeah. I am a fall girl through and through. And I literally, before I got on this podcast, just had pumpkin spice yogurt, and it was so good.
Yeah. So, before we came on the air, we were talking a little bit about diversity. So how can you ensure that classroom spaces are inclusive and that they cater to the diverse needs of all children?
Oh, such a great and important question. Mm-hmm. So let's start in the book nook. Look at your books. Do your books represent, first of all, every child in your program?
Mm-hmm.
If it doesn't, get on Amazon, get on Chapters, get on Barnes and Nobles. I think that's what you have in the US. Do what you need to do, because you absolutely cannot not have a book that represents every child in your program. Every child deserves to see themselves in literature. And if there isn't a book for a specific need or a specific family type or whatever it is, maybe you're the person to write it. But I'm really hoping it's all out there. So start with your book nook, but then look at your toys, right? What do your toys look like? Are there, if you have little figurines, what color are the skin of your figurines? Are they all walking on two legs, or do you have some people represented in wheelchairs? Are they all able to see, or do you have somebody with a cane who maybe is blind? Like, are you representing diversity in your program, as well as different family dynamics? So a great way to represent different family dynamics is to have a family wall. What a great way to show that everybody's family is different by showing the families of your program.
Yeah.
So that, and also just constantly self-reflecting, right? And listening. I heard a great quote the other day that says we have 2 eyes and 2 ears and 1 mouth, and we should use them accordingly. And as an extrovert and a very chatty person, I sometimes forget that. But when you sit back and listen and watch the children and listen to their questions, because children will ask, like, why do you have a pimple on your head? I mean, if you ever want to feel self-conscious, go sit in a room of preschoolers, right? But what a great question to ask, because sometimes people have pimples. So let's talk about it. Don't avoid those questions. Those questions are a great way for us to think, maybe we need to talk about this in our program. Maybe, I think of, we used to have a little boy who had 2 moms, and one of the girls, this was really new to her, and she was so curious, well, why does he have 2 moms? Where is his dad? So we made sure to integrate this into our circle time, not so much being like, well, this kid has, but talking about different family dynamics. And one of my favorite books, especially for the start of the school year, is a book called Family by Todd Parr. And that is always a great book to introduce, but also talking not just about, families, but also houses. So I live in an apartment. This was always a huge surprise when I worked at a certain school. None of these children lived in apartments. They all lived in detached, might I add, very large homes. So what do you mean you live in an apartment? Like, what does it look like? And I once took a video of my apartment and brought it to school to show them. And they thought it was the coolest thing ever because I had an elevator.
So you said so many great things there. So sorry, I slid off to the side because I went to grab my notebook. So there are a couple of things I want to add to what you said.
Yeah.
I think it is, yes, we should be very intentional when we're selecting our materials to have things that are representative of our students and our community. But I think another thing that I'm always very cognizant of is also hiring staff that look like my children, right? Because it's beyond a poster, beyond a book, right? So yes, that's a great starting point, but I really am always very intentional about when I'm hiring my staff to say, okay, what do we need here? And sometimes the diversity could be age, it could be experience, it could be race. There's so many different things. So I really try to get rich, diverse teachers in my program because I think we all bring something so unique to the table. The other thing I want to share is a great little story that happened about 7 weeks ago. So you had brought up about a family with 2 moms. So we were out in the play yard, and I have a few families that have either 2 moms, 2 dads, and the kids were playing out in the play yard, and one of the girls said, "I'm the mom." And the other girl went, "I want to be the mom." And the third little girl said, and I literally could just cry. I was so excited. The third girl said, "Well, I could be the mom and you can be the mom because So I'm going to not use the kid's name. Susie has two moms, so we can have two moms. And all the kids looked at each other and went, yeah, that's true. And they went and played. And I was like that was just like a real life epiphany that happened without any teacher guidance, without any interruption of the conversation. So again, just having that exposure to real life, they were like, oh, this is, a thing. And then the other thing I wanted to say is, on the family wall, it is wonderful to talk about what is different for families. Like my family lives in an apartment, yours lives in a penthouse. I think that's great, but I love to do full circle and say, here's the things that are different, and here are the things that are the same. Right. So I think that's so important. So you said so many great things, and I just wanted to kind of add to what you said, my experiences or how I felt about them. But I thought those are all great things that you brought up. So.
Oh, absolutely. And I would have been absolutely shattered if we walked away and hadn't talked about also talking about what's the same, because at the end of the day, families love each other. And I don't care who you are, what you do, that's what matters.
Yeah. Yeah. So how do you encourage active engagement and movement in a classroom, right? So especially you had gone back and said, there's not enough, maybe sometimes not enough space. We're very, very lucky that not all of my, but two of my preschool classrooms in particular actually have almost double the amount of space that's required. Almost double, literally. Yeah. So sometimes it's a blessing, sometimes it's a curse. But, let's talk about how can we engage active, movement within a classroom setting.
Okay. So I'm going to come from that place of yes, right? If we keep coming from that place of yes, we start to see where our no's are coming from. So start by observing, where do you say no? Is there a certain area of the room where children are climbing where you find yourself redirecting them because they shouldn't be climbing there? If that's the case, can you add something in for them to get that gross motor out? Because we want children moving. In order for children to have good fine motor skills to write, we have to build up their shoulders. Like, we can't go right to the fingers. We've got to build up shoulders first. So one thing that a fellow teacher did that if I was back in the classroom, this would be it for sure. One of my number one items. They put in at their door a pull-up bar. And it was just, again, right? Like, think about all the muscles engaged in a pull-up bar. So when children just need to get that out, they also added, if you have the space, a mini trampoline with the handles. And then they started addressing, like, okay, is it a problem if the child climbs on the chair? Yes. Is it a problem if the child climbs on the chair and I, the educator, am standing nearby? No. It's not a problem. So look at where you're saying no and how you can turn that no into a yes. Do you bring in a substitution? Do you bring in a negotiation? But then also adding in that movement. Under the table is an amazing place for movement to happen. If you pull your chairs out from the table and put toys underneath, you will see crawling starting to happen. I see children, I've done it where underneath of the table, I've stuck paper. Okay, so I'm adding in a 2D piece, and I've put markers, and the children are reaching up and working on the art. So we're getting in that arm movement, right? We're not sitting at a table in a stagnant position, which most of them are at home on the couch with an iPad. Let's be realistic. So we're adding in that movement piece without them running around, right? So there's so many opportunities for movement. And of course, my number one place for movement is the block center. The bigger your block center, the better. And when I say blocks, it doesn't even have to be wooden blocks. I am a huge fan of going to a coffee shop and asking them when their next coffee delivery is, and then asking them to save the boxes for me. People are more than happy to do it if you tell them it's for children. And also, blocks or cardboard boxes don't hurt as much when they fall on your nose. Trust me, I know.
Yeah. So we talked a little bit about, and you kind of had alluded, like, if I'm a teacher and I'm sitting near the child and they're able to get on the chair, is that okay? So let's talk a little bit about how we involve the children in the design process and really empower them to take that ownership of their learning space.
So the dramatic center is probably my favorite way to start because I am a play-based teacher. So my students kind of had free reign of my entire classroom. They could build what they wanted, when they wanted, how they wanted. We played for hours every day. But lunch was one of our structured activities. And during lunch, I'd be like, well, I'm noticing nobody's really playing in the dramatic center anymore. Any suggestions? And it is amazing what children can come up with for a dramatic center. But also in a dramatic center, if you don't put pre-designed things, so let's say you put rocks, you put pom-poms, you put Play-Doh, which I know is hard for a lot of people, but Play-Doh in the dramatic center is transformative because Play-Doh can be anything. It can be the pizza. So now your dramatic center becomes the pizza shop. It can be a pie. So now it becomes a bakery. It can become a Starbucks. So my favorite dramatic center the students ever did was they made a Starbucks. And it may or may not be because their teacher is a little addicted to Starbucks. And I may have subconsciously created this by accident. But again, creating a play-based environment takes so much pressure off of you having to do changeover. Like when we move away from themes and move into play, things start to naturally transpire. So for example, with this Starbucks, we had Play-Doh, we had pom-poms, we had rocks. Well, the children started serving coffee. So I'm saying Starbucks, but really it was a coffee shop. So now I'm observing, I'm taking notes, and now I go to Starbucks and ask them if I can have a bunch of cups. And I add it to their dramatic center to enhance the play. But the children have already changed the dramatic center. Same thing with the block center. So I love to add loose parts. So again, I'm listening and I'm watching. So my students learned about the Burj Khalifa and how it was the tallest building in the world. And this became an obsession. And so they wanted to know what other buildings were the tallest. So I printed off photos and added them to the dramatic center. I found a book on blocks and added that to the block center, not the dramatic center. And I let children move between spaces. So yes, there's an intentional way to involve the children, but the best way to involve the children is to uninvolve you and put yourself in the place as the observer and then scaffold the learning based on what you're seeing.
That really was almost my next question. So I'll ask the question just in case there's more you want to add to it. But what I was going to say is, as either a director or a teacher, how do you assess the effectiveness of your classroom design and then make adjustments as needed?
Observation, but not just observation where you're watching. You're not there just to watch. You have to be taking notes because you're also documenting their journey. So a perfect example is in the Block Center, and one of the goals for kindergarten in my program was the children had to write their names. That was an expectation on me as the educator. Now, whether or not that was developmentally appropriate is a different conversation. But my role was to document that. So one of the rules, I'm using that in inverted commas there, for the block play was your block's allowed to stay up all week, but you have to have your name on it. So I always had a stack of Post-its. And for some children, it was squiggles, and then I would write their name underneath. For other children, I took a yellow marker. So let's say it was Carla's blocks. I would write Carla in yellow marker. And just as a sidebar, the reason I'm saying yellow marker instead of doing the dots is because it's been proven a couple of times that children can't actually see their name when it's the dots, whereas if it's a yellow marker and they're going over it in pencil, it just seems to work better. So some children are tracing their name over the yellow marker and some children are doing it developmentally or independently, So I, the educator, am meeting the child where they're at. I'm not expecting a child that's maybe just come up from preschool to be able to independently write their name. They're not there yet. And a child that's about to enter grade 1 might not be able to do that yet. I'm meeting each child where they're at and I'm documenting it usually with photos or writing it down. And I used to have a classroom wall full of Post-it notes because let's be realistic. We are going so fast all the time. So I would just scribble Post-it notes, stick it on a wall, and then gather my stuff later at the end of the day and then write it all out. I hope that's kind of answered the question.
Yeah, definitely. So before we wrap up, let me ask you, can you share a memorable experience or success story relating to design of a classroom with children's input, or with one of your clients or yourself in your own classrooms? Tell us a story where this really kind of hits home.
I'll try to pick just one.
Okay.
We know, so I always say that behavior is a form of communication. So when I use the word behavior, I don't necessarily mean positive or negative, but when I was supervisor, we had a lot of concerns in our kindergarten program. Their teacher had left. There was a lot of transitions going on. So there was 3 particular children that were fist fighting on a daily basis. And it was a concern. And of course, as supervisor, I had parents in my office all the time. Kindergarten is my specialty. They're the best age group in my personal opinion. They get my sense of humor. I just think they're so much fun. So I decided that I was actually going to step down as supervisor and go back into kindergarten because I love a challenge. Like, just give me a challenge. Like, this is fun for me. The first thing I did was I changed the environment. First being, I increased the size of my block center, and I changed from teacher directed art to processed art. Now, that in itself is a whole nother podcast, but suddenly there was less need for me to get into a battle with children over control. If you are trying to control a child, you've lost. Don't even bother. Like, there's absolutely no point. But sometimes it comes from our own upbringing, so we have to look at that. But increasing this block center and allowing children to work collaboratively, yes, conflicts came up, but now I'm there as the observer, but also I'm there to help navigate those social skills when the social conflicts came up. So what was happening originally was child A would walk in. Well, child B's been thinking all night about how child A ticked him off and slighted him yesterday. So as soon as child A walks in, child B just whacks him. It was unreal. And usually in front of the parents, of course, because why wouldn't it be? Well, we were able to navigate that. And it was, oh my gosh, when I tell you this program, it was so beautiful. And not that I have favorites, but these 3 absolutely will always have a special place in my heart because they were just very sensitive children with really big emotions. So having the yes space where they could play what they wanted, but of course they were all interested in the same thing, where they were set up in a safe space to practice that collaboration and that problem solving and critical thinking, game changer. Absolute game changer for behaviors.
Awesome. So what advice would you give childcare directors or educators who are looking to enhance their classroom environment?
So for childcare directors, we'll start there.
Okay.
Because I made the mistake. If your team is new to yes spaces and third teacher, go slow. I was the person that walked in and was like, we're changing the whole classroom.
That'd be me.
Don't do it. It doesn't go well. You get as much pushback from your teachers as you do from the children.
Mm-hmm.
So, and again, remembering we can't control other people, right? We're not the bosses of them. We're there to support them. So for childcare directors, that's my advice is get excited. Excitement is contagious. And support the transition, but also send them YouTube videos. Like that was a big thing that really won my team over was I sent them YouTube videos about other programs so that they could visualize it. Some people needed the visualization. Mm-hmm. For educators, say yes. It's going to be a little chaotic. It's going to be a transition. There's going to be at least one child that wants to see how far they can push the yes scale. But then there's that reflection piece of, why? Why are they pushing the yes piece? Also remember that some children are going to be really hesitant to try new things because they might not have a yes environment at home. And that's okay. Everybody's going to be at different stages. But also, if you just say yes to everything, but now you're finding there's safety concerns, pull back and change your environment. It really is so much of yes, reflect, adjust.
Yeah. Okay. And what about teachers? Do you think, is there anything we want to add for the teachers?
Lean in. When I tell you, like, honestly, trust the yes. get rid of the chaos. You are in this environment for so many hours. You deserve to have an environment that you enjoy being in. By the time I started to the time I left the classroom and embracing these yes spaces, no joke, I knew this particular group of children better than any group I'd ever known before, because we became this little mini family. Because now I had time to really get to know them. If you ask me, I could probably still tell you what they were wearing for Halloween in 2012. No joke. The bond was unreal because I got to know them as individuals, not as this group.
Yeah.
So now I was able to adjust my program. So going back to what we had said about inclusivity, right? Your classroom needs to be for everybody. So a perfect example is if you have a child with special needs in your program and you've got a bin or a box that's just them, I need you to question, why can't somebody else play with that? Because what a great way to add in that social piece, right? So know your children individually and then adjust your classroom so everybody can play. It's not easy, but I promise you it's possible.
Yeah, that's amazing advice. So, Carla, I can't even believe that we have 4 minutes left. So,
oh my gosh,
I know. Can you look at the bottom of that time? It went by so fast. Could you please, so folks can follow you, learn more about you, can you just give all your connections, where they find you, socials, and all the things?
Oh, with pleasure. So, Early Learning Foundations is my company. So if you Google that, you will find me. But best place is Instagram at EL Foundations or the Everything EC podcast.
I love it. Thank you so much, Carla. For my friends who tune in every day, I absolutely love you. You guys from California to Florida to Rhode Island, of course, my favorite, and everywhere in between. I appreciate your support so much. If you could also, if you're not following us already on Instagram, please do that today. Go to CCDC, short for Childcare, Director's Chair podcast. You will find us very easily. And as always, thank you for tuning in. Remember, it's the small details that make a big impact on the success of your childcare business. As always, have a great day. Bye.
Well, all the cute little kiddos have been picked up and it's time to go home. And that'll do it for another episode of the Childcare Director's Chair. Please leave a review so Erica knows the information is helping you to manage and improve your childcare centers. Remember to subscribe to get the latest episode from Erica's Childcare Director's Chair.